All right, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Chris Latham. It is Tuesday, May 31st, and we are here at our first meeting for game music composition. I am the course director for the course, and I'll be hanging out with you guys throughout the month. And we have a wide variety of topics to hit on and discuss, all pertaining to the work of a music composer working on a game project. We'll talk about the overall approach and kind of the role of a music composer. How do you find jobs and work and projects to get involved with? What is sort of expected from the client as a music composer working on a new game project? Certainly, we will be talking about the class this evening. We'll be doing a whole discussion of all of the assignments that we have here for week one. And we will get into all of the projects over the course of the month, how the month breaks down between the assignments and the work that you're doing each week, and also these Tuesday and Thursday afternoon classes. So this evening, or I guess this afternoon, depending on where you are, is a bit different overall than the rest of our Tuesday classes because, like I said, we have a lot of material to introduce to start out the month. But by next Tuesday, you will have turned in your first round of work, and we will be doing a bit of peer review each week of your weekly compositions. So each Tuesday, we will be discussing all of the new assignments for the week, and then we'll also go ahead and you have an opportunity to submit your work for us to take a listen to, and it gives you the opportunity, especially if you can be in the live classes, but even if not, you can certainly check it out in the archive. But I'll go through it step by step and talk about your overall approach. But for everybody that watches and checks out the archive and participates in the peer review, you get to see what everybody else is doing, different approaches and different workflows of things, good things and bad things that you may have never even approached or thought about. So each week we will take the opportunity on Tuesday to really discuss all of the assignments, how we're doing on those from the previous week, and what's coming up in the new week. And of course, the second half of our class today will be discussing all of our new assignments here for week one. Our Thursday classes are a bit more directed towards topics of the industry, different approaches, and kind of creative directions of how you can start working on a brand new soundtrack. You are hired by a company and or a client, then they need specific music in a particular format for their new game project, and we'll talk about how do you really start from nothing and determine what type of music you need, how much music you need, where it all might go, and kind of the creative process involved in that. We'll also get into the technical side of things. The industry as a whole, or certainly working on game projects, there is a mixture of the whole creative side of things. It is still composition and production of music, but there is also the technical process of how the music actually gets into the game and how does the music react to what the player is doing. There's when you have music for its own sake, music that plays and you just listen to it from an album. There's music that goes to an image, whether it's film or television or commercial work. With games, you have both the music, the image, and you also have this layer of interactivity where the player has some element of control. So we'll talk about all of the things that are the same and that are different, in the production of music, specifically for a game project. So each week we have different games to work on. We have a fully functioning and complete Mac games that you will be completing and creating all of the assets for both the music and the sound effects to complete the soundtrack to the game. So we have different games in different sort of approaches and styles. And each week they will require a very specific way for the audio to be set up. And so we'll discuss how you can start from a blank DAW session and figure out how to build music in a particular way so that it will play back and work in a game. Music for games, there are certainly elements that are very similar in the production and the composition of music for any other form or media, but there are also very unique aspects of how the music works. Most music that you've ever worked with or listened to or created is probably in a linear form, and linear music is the most standard form of music. It's what most people are accustomed to. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a structure. Can be either kind of an ABC form or verse chorus, or there's any number of different structures that we put into our music, but there's typically a beginning, a middle, and an end, and every time you rewind back that song and listen to it again, it's going to be the exact same mix. You listen to a piece of music over and over again, and when you're mixing it and when you're producing the next track for your album, you listen to that piece of music and you craft it in a very particular way, and you create a final stereo mix that you put on a disc and or you put on the radio or you stream it across the internet, and everybody listens to that one same version of the song. But in a game, music doesn't exist in one linear format. When you watch a movie, you hear the soundtrack, you hear the dialogue and all of the sound effects, and it is the same. It is basically a 2-hour-long file that's playing in the background right along with the video or the image that you are watching. And every time, again, you rewind it back, you're going to hear the exact same thing. In a game, there isn't a one single audio file that's playing from beginning to end as you play through the game. People play games for hours. People play games, the whole game experience can be 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 hours long. If it gets into large multiplayer online games, people get lost in those games for a very long time. It can be easily 100+ hours of content in many of these large games. That doesn't mean that there is a 100-hour-long audio file that is playing from beginning to end all the way through the game. Or even if it's a normal 10 or 20-hour game, there isn't 10 hours of music involved in that. There is an hour and a half to 3 hours worth of music that is then rearranged in different ways to work in the game. It is not a single linear file. It is, no matter how long the music is needed for the game, it doesn't just come in one file. It is a whole bunch of individual files, little pieces and parts of the overall music soundtrack that is shuffled and resequenced and put back together to react to the gameplay as the player is playing the game. So there are all sorts of different things that trigger the music to change, the music to shift and to adjust in reaction to what's going on in the game. So depending on the player's score, or how much time is left in the game, or how much health you have or damage there is or you caused, or how many enemies are around, or how much danger there is. There's all sorts of different things that you can use to trigger and change the music over time. So we'll talk about how do you build music for a game that the final version of it doesn't really exist until somebody plays the game. So the music is composed, the music is mixed, and the music is edited and sequenced in a certain way so that it can be rearranged in real time in the game. But the final version of what the player hears, or a million different players hear, will be slightly different according to how they play the game. And so that version, you don't really know what the final version is going to sound like as you create and produce the music. Yes, you know where the composition is going to go, and you know how the music is supposed to build and change because you as the music composer created everything. But the final version doesn't exist until somebody actually plays the game. So we'll talk about what is the same, what is the different in the production of music for games compared to other more linear media, like music for albums or film. We'll talk about the overall approach. How do you even start building a musical structure so that it works, so that you can format it. Music for a game is in a series of loops and one-shots, so sounds that, or musical phrases that play one time only, or some that loop either a predetermined number of times, or they might loop infinitely, depending on how long it might take for a player to actually go through the game. You'll have some players that will blaze through the game as fast as possible, and they will be flying past. They'll either be really good or just trying to skip through as many things as possible, or you'll have the people that are going slow and steady through the game. And the music has to, some people will be skipping past certain aspects of the soundtrack. Other folks will be kind of stuck in a particular place of the part of the soundtrack, and before it triggers and changes and moves on. So how do we build a soundtrack that has to morph and adjust in reaction to what a player is going to do at a later time? So that is certainly a mixture of traditional composition techniques and the modern technology of audio for games. So the topics of the class will kind of cover a wide variety of things. We'll talk about the industry, we'll talk about creative and compositional approaches, we'll talk about the technology behind everything that's running the show. That is generally how at least the topics of the month will break down. The first half of the month is more towards the creative side, getting started, working with clients, figuring out and determining exactly what a client needs from their game. A lot of times when you start a game, there isn't a game that exists at that point. It's not like they go out and film and record things, and you have dailies and you can watch at least some raw footage from that was shot on that set that day, and you can do a spotting session with the film director. There are certain aspects that as you are composing the music, you don't even know how it's going to end up in the game. You're often not writing for specific parts of the game early on. You're writing more for character or theme or emotion or action or different more conceptual ideas. So we'll start there, and how do you start building up your tracks and building your music in a way that's going to work for the game. As I mentioned, each week there is a different game, and those different games have different musical approaches. The need for music in each game is quite unique, even if it we'll talk about different game genres. Even if it's a puzzle game or a racing game or a fighting game or an action game or an adventure game or a sports game or whatever type, even though it fits into a category, each one of those is unique in its approach for the music and sound effects. We will get into, later on in the month, we'll get into all of the tools and the technology. We'll talk about audio middleware and game engines, the actual technology that's running everything in the background. So that is generally where we are going, at least with our classes, our Tuesday and Thursday classes. The assignments follow that. As I mentioned earlier, we will certainly talk about how the assignments go through the course of each week. I guess the other thing that I want to bring up is I typically start out, I want to bring up 2 disclaimers pretty early on about the class, and just to get those out of the way and to clarify a few things. Number 1 is you don't actually have to be any good at video games to be successful in this class. Just for the fact that it is video games, I understand that folks going through this class have a wide variety of experience with video games. Some people eat, live, and breathe video games. They are up on the newest and latest games. They are understand the technology and the companies and the industry and who's making what games, and they're playing games, and they have favorite games and composers, and so if that is you going through this class, I can certainly nerd out with you all day long about games and what's going on in the industry, and get deeper into the technology and how it all works behind the scenes. But I also understand that there are folks going through the degree program that haven't been playing video games since they were thrown quarters in the arcade machine, or maybe playing chess or solitaire on their computer, haven't played a video game for a very long time. And that's perfectly fine also. Your actual ability to play video games is of no importance in this class. Now, while you are in this class, we will be immersing you in the games industry. We'll talk about it. If you have no games to play, we have games each week to play. They are Mac games, so they function and work on your computer, all set up, free, ready to go. But your ability to actually control and play those games is of no importance to your overall success in this class. What is important is all of the skills that you have been learning and gaining over the course of the entire degree program up until this point. So the skills that are expected are your ability or understanding of music theory and production and recording and instrumentation and composition, and understanding all of the tools, mastery of your DAW and overall production approach, all of your instruments, and anything that you can get your hands on. So, because that is the overall focus of the class. The projects are really set up as you are a new composer hired on to work on a game project. I am the client, and I provide you with the information about the game. I give you the overall what is needed for the game project, how many files, and how they're all set up. And then it's up to you to realize the musical composition, the musical soundtrack for these games. So it's important that you can kind of interpret the client's kind of goals with the music and what they need. And a lot of times when working with clients, they, especially in the game industry, they are game developers. They are not music composers. A lot of folks don't really know, they can't tell you what they want, but they know it when they hear it. So they can tell you, yes, I like that and I want more of that, or no, hey, how about less of that over there? And so you will be working on these particular game projects, creating the music and the sound effects for all of the games. So by the end of the month, you will have 3 fully working, completed game projects with your music and the sound effects working in the games. So each week you will create the music soundtrack for it, and then the week after that you'll go back and do all of the sound effects. So we'll be talking about those games. The first disclaimer is you don't actually have to be any good at video games to be successful in this class. What will make you successful is creating all of the soundtrack for the games and working on the projects to complete. We'll talk about how the best approach to actually work and finish and complete the projects. But your skills as a music composer is what is most important. So the other disclaimer, really a question that is typically brought up pretty early in the process that I like to address, is the question of, do I need to be able to program or code to be able to work on games and work in the games industry as a music composer? And no, you do not need to be able to program or code. The skills that you bring, as I mentioned, are the skills as a music composer to create and compose and record and produce the entire music soundtrack for the game. There is certainly a technical aspect to the process of getting music working in the game. At points, working on with different clients, sometimes you will be sometimes you will just be creating the music and delivering the WAV files, and then they will take the WAV files and actually make them work in the game, so that when somebody pushes a button or hits the buttons on their keyboard or mouse, the game plays back correctly and it plays the correct piece of music. We have had the audio director for EA Sports. He's actually an audio lead, or was an audio lead on Madden and PGA and some of the other sports titles. We have EA Sports here in Orlando, and so he's come over to talk with our students, and that is one of the very common questions when we have folks visit is, I am a music composer, I'm a songwriter, I'm an audio producer, I want to work in games. Do I need to be able to program or code to work on games? And the typical answer is, if you can write music and create music, that's the main skill that they're looking for. If you can write music and create sound effects, then it makes you even more valuable on the team, because you can create all of the audio, music, and sound effects needed for a project. If you can create music and sound effects and code, then you're pretty much a unicorn, because those people don't really exist all that often. There is technology in all of it, but the actual getting into the code and programming it is typically not an aspect of it. Now, we'll talk about some of the approaches and what might be necessary when working with a technical team, but real understanding of C++ or deep understanding of programming languages might not be the first place to start. So what else can we talk about here? Again, whoops, I disappeared. Again, my name is Chris Latham. I am a course director and started this class about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. Get all stuff set back up. I've been with Full Sail for about 14 years now. Started teaching in the recording arts department before there was music production, and did like the studios and the consoles and the post-production classes. That's kind of where my history was earlier. Before games was more post-production, recording, sound design, dialogue, all of those, most production for film, television kind of work. And have always been a lifelong gamer, and wanted to work with audio and games. I started seeing how, while I was keeping up with games and playing them all the time, seeing how some of the technology was opening up. You could actually get into the games and get access to the WAV files and switch them out and put your own sounds in there. So I was learning how to tear the games apart and create new assets. So I started working on a couple of independent game projects that led to working with EA Sports here in Orlando. I've been working with them on a couple of their different projects and a couple of other outside contracts. I'll talk about here in just a sec. But Contact. Getting in contact with me, best way would be iChat or email. I am teaching on campus and online. So online I am available both through iChat and email on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but I am away from my desk phone. So you can call my phone, my extension 4118. But if you get my voicemail, then also write me an email because I can respond that way much quicker, and we can set up a time. Maybe we could immediately go to training, to chat, or we can set up some other time to meet or do whatever. So find me on iChat, send me an email if you can't find me through phone or any other means. Emails and iChat are always a good way to go. Outside of Full Sail, I have a game audio contracting company called EngineAudio.com, working on a number of different game projects. So, moved over to games because there was quite a big explosion of the technology and the availability of mostly PC gaming, to be able to go in and rip the games apart and see how they actually are working. So it was about, about 10 years ago at this point, where we were getting started on some game projects. We worked on Madden 2009 and some PGA Tour stuff, and are currently working on the new Madden 2016 project with them, doing some of their audio and dialogue work. And not some, a whole bunch of it. What else? We are also working on a multiplayer underwater game called Depth. If it's available on the Steam store, which is, if you haven't not familiar with that, we'll talk about Steam every once in a while. It's kind of like iTunes for games. It's got Mac games and it's got PC games. There's free games on there. You can download, check it out. It's a very cool system for digital distribution of game projects, and there's a lot of game teams working on projects there. So I transitioned more into the game industry. Then Full Sail got on the game audio train about 7 or 8 years ago now, and we created a game audio course on campus, and then the music production course came online, and now we're doing music composition specifically for games. So definitely glad to see how the games industry as a whole, and certainly game audio at Full Sail, is always growing. I've found way more opportunity in the games industry than I ever did in other parts of the music industry. I was going to be a superstar, a rock star at some point in my life, and I was going to be a studio engineer at some point in my life, I was, and a production engineer, working post-production, film, and just trying all sorts of different aspects of the industry, and I've found way more success and just a better, it's probably not a good way of saying it, a more inclusive, open industry in the games industry overall. And through the wonders of the internet, there is a lot of information, a lot of networking and communication out there. So the overall goals of this class, of course, number one there is to write music. Oh, sound went away. Uh-oh. Did you lose it? Or did I lose it? Can you hear me now? Any better? There we go. Wonder if it dropped out for some reason. So the overall goals of the class, number one, of course, would be to write music, and you, of course, this is your whole goal of the entire degree program, is to be trying as many different styles and approaches to composition and production, building out your demo reel or portfolio, and just gaining as much material as you can all through the degree and all through your series of classes as you head towards the end, and hopefully by the end of everything, you will have a solid amount of work to show what you are capable of doing. And so we give you game projects, have 3 different game projects this month that require the complete music soundtrack. The next goal is playing video games. This is I have a very important concept in the class, which is called game research. And game research is you should be playing video games. You should be playing any video games you can get your hands on. Maybe you have a console. Maybe you have a PC. Maybe you're a PC gamer. Maybe you have certainly you have a Mac. And even if you aren't playing any video games, you have a Mac where you can go to the Mac App Store, or as I mentioned, you can go to the Steam store and find free Mac applications, free Mac games to download. If you have no other games, then we give you some games to play, and this is really as part of it is the fun of playing video games, but the reality is you should be paying attention to everything that you can in the part of the industry that you are most interested in. And so if you are interested in the music industry, you want to be a recording artist, you want to be a songwriter, you want to be a producer, you want to write the music, whatever aspect of the music industry you want to work in, that means you should be paying attention to the industry as much as you can, listening to all forms of music, getting access to as much new music as you can, and in a wide variety of styles, figuring out what is popular and what sells, and why is it popular, and who recorded it, and the entire production behind the albums and the record labels and all of the industry people behind a particular album. If you're interested in film, you should be watching all sorts of films. You should be paying attention to the director, the composer, the producer, the production company, any behind the scenes information that you can get into the production of the music soundtrack. And the composer will give you as a wide variety of knowledge in the industry. And it just so happens that if you are interested in the games industry, and at least for this month you should be playing video games. You should be up on the industry and playing games and paying attention. Certainly if you're having fun playing the game, but you're also critically listening to the game, paying attention to the music and the sound effects, and how does it work, and how does it change, and when does it turn on and off, and when does it play, and how does it move from one piece of music to the next. So this is really important in the industry because your clients speak in terms of previous projects, right? If you're in the music industry, they speak in terms of great albums or instruments or sounds. Hey, did you hear the drum sound from this particular album? That's exactly the kind of thing that we're going for. Did you hear the newest track from this songwriter over here? Clients speak in terms of previous films or previous games, or they have a reference and a language that is common between everybody that's in the industry. So keeping up with the industry as a whole will lead to a lot of success because really you spend around enough time around it. Seems pretty big in the beginning, but it's a relatively small industry, which means that I really feel that there is more opportunity than there are folks trying to get into the industry. There are a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of bad music and bad work out there, but if you pay attention to how the industry works and get involved, then there is a lot of opportunity. And then amongst all of the music writing and the video game playing, there is a lot to learn because it involves aspects of composition and theory and the entire production side of things and the creation of the soundtrack, of the music. And then there is the technical side of how the music actually works in the game. And there's a lot of the approaches that we take to creating the soundtrack to the games are a bit like puzzles, or they often break people's brains a little bit in trying to wrap their brain around how the music is actually going to work and sound in the game. We do have completely working games, so by the end of it, you can certainly take your music, put it in the game, and actually listen to how it sounds and how it works, and hopefully realize any issues or problems and make changes. Is there any questions overall so far as we move forward here? I'm going to take a quick pause here, and we will get into the next topic. Hold on. All right. So let's get more into the assignments for the class. Excuse me. We'll talk about the kind of the overall, all of the assignments, kind of the general overview throughout the month, and then we'll get certainly more into the specifics of week one assignments. So, step one is don't fail. And that is certainly easily said and can be easily accomplished through a couple of sure steps along the way. And number one would be to download all the material as soon as you can through each week. So Monday morning, I understand certainly yesterday was a Memorial Day, and hopefully you had a restful day off, or maybe one day not thinking about Full Sail, or maybe you got to jump on everything and downloaded this week's assignments. So go ahead and give me yes or no in the chat. Have you downloaded this week's assignments, including our first game called 2D Platformer, and played 2D Platformer and checked it out? Well, if you have not, then definitely want to do that as early as you can through the week to see how the games actually work. Yes, keep it classy. You'll be changing out all of the sound effects and all of the music, so you want to get a sense of how it works, and we will take a look at it here in just a bit. But each week, download the assignments, look over the PDFs, all of the material. We got videos, we've got the actual games to play, and just certainly before a Tuesday class or Thursday, have some questions about how the games work and overall approach, and we can discuss anything like that. There are technical aspects to these games and these assignments. So if you do run into any technical issues, please get in contact with me as soon as possible. Really not going to be that much help over the weekend or on a Sunday night. Every once in a while, if I catch your email, will respond. But a lot of times, if they come in rolling close to midnight on Sunday, you should be checking out and making sure everything works overall before that point. The other real strong way to succeed in this class is to do the revisions. Each week you have the opportunity to do weekly revisions. You have the opportunity to revise and change and make any updates to the previous week's assignments. So this week, all of your assignments are due Sunday, and I mean, same with each week. Everything is due Sunday night. And then in the first part of the next week, I will go through and grade all of the assignments, provide grade sheets and feedback. I'll get those back to you, and you can make any changes and updates to the assignment, and by the end of the next week, return those assignments back to me, and I will update the grade. And that's the best way of being successful in this class. The people who are successful in this class do the revisions because it's typically a pretty strong swing of points in the positive direction. Sometimes if you do something in the setup of your music for the game, and you're setting up your music and bouncing it out, and you don't take the right approach to it, and every once in a while can decimate the grade pretty heavily, especially some of the simpler things of formatting the files or naming things correctly. Those typically hit your points harder overall, but they're also really easy things to fix. So you can make those changes because things like file names and formatting of your files, your music is just not going to work in the game. The game only recognizes your files in a very particular format, or else they just won't play back in the game. So making sure that everything is set up and formatted correctly is definitely important, and you can just make those changes and revise the files, and the points come flooding back in on the revision. So take the opportunity to download the assignments and take a look at them early on in the week, and then each week do your revision assignment. I also mentioned peer review in the beginning part of the class. Hold on here. I'm going to bring something up. I'm going to bring up FSO. FSO. Maybe? At some point here, let's see. There we go. All right, so week 1 game composition 2D platformer. We'll certainly go into detail about this assignment. Session preparation is a series of videos that are discussing a lot of the same things that I will hit on, but a little bit more detail about 2D platformer. Game capture. You will be capturing a video of your game with your music working in it. You'll take the opportunity to put your music into the game, test it all out to make sure it works, and then provide a video of it playing back. We'll talk about that process. Here's the peer review assignment. You will submit your video for this peer review, and we'll take a listen to it and watch it in class. And even if you aren't available for the live class, I'll still do an overview. I'll also bring up your WAV files that are delivered in a Logic session, and just talk my way through what we hear and overall approaches to the composition. There's a separate assignment for looping game music. Looping music is extremely important in games, and so we will talk about different techniques and different approaches to properly loop your music so that it works and properly plays back in the game. Each week there's a 20-question quiz that are pretty much based off of the Thursday classes and the slide presentations there. So you can take a look at the PDFs. You can get a lot of the information for the quiz off the PDF, but I'll also go into detail a bit more on Thursday class, or you can ask any questions if necessary. There's a discussion post of what is your favorite game, and it's an unweighted post that gives me just a bit of information about everybody's interests and experience with games. What's your favorite game? What's your favorite musical experience in a game? Favorite game soundtrack? anything like that. We'll post up videos, and we can talking about different. Give me a sense of everybody's understanding of games. And then your optional revisions at the end of week 2. Notice this is due at the end of the second week. You can go back and make any changes to at least the weighted assignments, the actual graded assignments, to make changes to those for improvements in the project and the grade. So that's generally how things break down through each week. Let's get into the actual games themselves and start by talking about your first game this week, a 2D platformer. Let me bring up a couple of materials here. Let's see here. So when you download everything, you get the actual application. You also get a PDF grade sheet. Oops, wrong one. You get the assignment here, kind of a documentation of the entire assignment. It goes into a bit more detail of the different aspects that we will talk about here. Where is it? Grade sheet here. Talk about that. All right, now let me bring up the video. And along with the application, you get a video that you can reference. Don't use the video directly for sync or timing of anything, because everybody's going to play the game a bit differently, and the timings would be different each time. But let's talk about the game as a whole. So I guess I should start out with, right here in the beginning, you see the logo, powered by Unity. It's created in the Unity game engine. We'll talk about game engines towards the end of the month, but it's kind of like saying Pro Tools or Logic. Which DAW do you use? And your choice of DAW is... or your choice of game engine can be similar to that. It's the main tool that you use to build the game. And the game company called Unity Games makes the Unity game engine. And they also make this game demo called 2D Platformer. And it's really there to show off their game technology and to show what their game engine is capable of doing and how you would kind of build your own platformer game. It is 2D, meaning that there's only two directions, left and right, and it is a platform game. Platform games are all about running and jumping from different platforms, and in this case, shooting at different aliens. So the kind of story behind this whole game is pretty ridiculous. You are a bean with a monocle and a top hat and a bazooka. And the aliens have invaded. They are invading London. You can see there's Big Ben that's kind of busted up over here, and the London Eye. I think this is London Bridge that has now fallen down because the alien invasion has taken over. And you are, of course, the only thing that can save the Earth at this point, or at least London. You with your trusty bazooka and your monocle ready to go. So I guess the short idea here is that it's a pretty ridiculous concept, kind of a wacky, silly game, lighthearted, would probably be family-friendly, all ages kind of game. So musically, you want to keep it kind of lighthearted, nothing too dark or heavy sounding, or we'll talk about the overall musical style and musical approach as we talk about the music itself. So I leave the overall style pretty much open to you, whether you want to go for more of an orchestral approach or more acoustic instrumentation. I've heard great stuff with live drums and live guitars and brass and pianos. And if you want to go for more synthetic approach, but there probably should be some kind of a silly aspect to it. Maybe you can play up the aspect of the alien invasion. I've heard stuff with synths and things like theremins that can work pretty well. So I also have some demos here. Won't just look at this. We'll actually take a listen here after a bit. Let's do this. We'll have Logic open and take a listen to some examples here in a moment. What else can I talk about here? So the style and the instrumentation I leave open to you. There is a very particular format for all of the files. Let me jump back over to the PDF. The PDF talks about a lot of a little bit more detail and the things that I will go over. Game is called 2D Platformer, made by Unity Games. It's more of a casual game. There really isn't much of a game there. There isn't a beginning nor an end. Well, there is actually a beginning. There's no end. It just keeps going and going and going, depending on how many aliens are destroyed. And it gives you an overview of how the music is going to work in the game. The game itself, 2D Platformer, has a long pedigree in classics like Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, and Metroid. Those are all classic platformer games. A lot of earlier style of games were known as platform type of games. And really, it's a good place to start because it is kind of a lighter, easier musical approach, and there isn't as much complexity going on in this music system as what we'll get into later on this month. Instructions on how to play. You can use the arrows to go left and right, up, or spacebar is jump, and left click on your mouse is to fire the bazooka. And you can also pick up health pickups and bomb pickups and have bombs explode. And all of that stuff will need sounds at some point. You'll need jump sounds and shooting sounds and enemy, what are they called? Enemy death sounds. There's all sorts of different things. So here is an important aspect of the PDF. You will have an asset list with every single assignment that lists all of the all of the WAV files that you will be creating. These are all of the 9 files that you will create for the music soundtrack for this game. The music for this game is divided out into 3 different sections, or 3 different parts. There are intros, there are main loops, and there are endings. And notice that we have 3 variations of each of those parts. So we have music intro 01, music intro 02, music intro 03, main loop 1, 2, and 3, and ending 1, 2, and 3. Gives you specifications about all of the files. The main loop files are going to be 8 bars long. The intro files are going to be 2 bars long. Intros and endings are 2 bars long. Everything is 16-bit 44.1 stereo files, and the main loop files have to be set up to loop. And we'll talk about what that means here. So let's take a look at some of these examples. Let's start here and kind of separate these out. So these are 4 different student submissions. So we have 3, these are the main loops. These are all 8 bars long. And then each student has 3 intros. And 3 endings. The endings are over here. See, endings 1, 2, and 3. And they are, it's just, they're first because of how things are imported in alphabetical order. Hold on just a sec. All right. So what we are going to do is only listen to one of these. Actually, make sure I muted all of them. Only listen to one at a time. And we'll talk about how they work. So, the most of the soundtrack, while people are playing the game, are going to be these 3 main loop cues. They're each 8 bars long, and the game will randomly choose one of them to play during gameplay, and when it reaches the end, it will then randomly choose another one. It can choose the same one again multiple times, or it can jump around in any sort of order. So for however long the player plays the game for, it will be these 3 8-bar loops randomly shuffling around. So when you reach the end of any one of these cues, it has to be in a place musically so that it can resolve back to the front or the beginning of the next cue. The ending of any one of these cues has to be able to jump to the beginning of any of the other cues at any point in time, or at least when it ends. So basically, whenever you reach the end of a cue, you have 3 paths in the road. You have one of 3 choices, or the computer makes a random choice to go to the beginning of the next cue. So as you build the music, it has to make sense so that they can shuffle around in any sort of order. The entire stereo mix needs to be in each one of these cues. So each one of these will contain drums, bass, harmony, and melody, all of the instrumentation that makes up your composition. So they are basically 3 parts of the same composition. Now you want to make it feel, even as it switches back and forth between the 3 of them, that they are all 3 parts of the same song, not completely different songs or different patterns, or have too much variation between them. Then we have our 2-bar intro cues. The intros play at the very beginning of the game. So when the bean here, when your main player, the game starts, or the round starts. If you end up losing all your health and fall off the edge or whatever, lose a life, when the game starts over, then your character drops back in and the intros will start playing. So these intros need to be 2 bars long. Depending on the tempo of your music and your time signature will determine the actual length of these cues. So depends on how fast your music is, will change how fast these intro cues play. So they play through 2 bars, and then once it reaches the ending, it will randomly choose one of these main loop cues, and it will start playing and rotating through all of those. Now, the endings are the end of the composition. The endings happen at the end of the game. So, back here. So, as the player is playing the game, it is main loop all the way through. They play, they are randomly switching between those 3 main loop cues. But eventually, let's get over here. There he goes. You can see there, the bean here has a health meter above his head. That's how much health he has left. And if that goes down to 0, which it will do just in a moment here, he loses all of his health. He falls down and falls into the toxic sludge below. And so this is where the ending is triggered. It's going to trigger the moment he loses all of the health and he goes sailing down. So your ending cues will start playing and cut off the previous main loop wherever it is and transition immediately into one of the 3 ending cues. And once the ending cue plays, Then it starts all over again. The next round starts. The intro music plays for 2 bars. Then it goes into the main loop and it starts the whole process over again. So let's take a listen here, and I'll kind of talk my way through this. Let me make sure that we can hear this. Turn this down, loop that, and let's go to main loop here. All right, let's see here. Probably can't hear anything yet. So let's turn this up. All right, that looks like it works. Can you give me another heads up in the chat that you can hear this? You can hear the music and you can hear me, and that's still working. Excellent. Okay. So you can see that this is an 8-bar loop. Your composition is going to need to have drums, bass, harmony, and melody. And there should be a melody that develops across the entire 8 bars. And as it switches to the next cue, there needs to be variation and change. The melody should change a bit. The progression should change a bit. The instrumentation will stay the same. The drum kit will be the same, but it'll play a different pattern. The melody, instrumentation might change. You might switch to a new lead melody or lead melodic instrument. But when it reaches the end, it has to be able to transition to the next piece of music. It needs to be able to loop around. And there needs to be interesting changes from one to the next. And listen to the loop here. No sudden obvious markers that make it obvious that the loop has gone around. All right. So, main loops will be heard through most of the gameplay. The intros. The intros will play at the beginning of the level. They need to create a sense of build or rise into the main loops. So let me play one of these intros. It needs to feel like it has sort of upward movement ready to head into the main loop cues. Often will hang on a 4 or 5 chord so that it can resolve back to the tonic in the main loops. You're probably safe to start each one of these cues on the downbeat on the tonic so that no matter where your progression leads off to, it can return back to the tonic, or you know that when you jump to any of these cues, it is on that first tonic chord that you can resolve to and kind of guarantee. The other thing to mention is that you should maintain similar tempo and time signature and general pacing overall. You don't want to mess too much with rhythm, or else it'll feel like a pretty sudden jolt as it jumps from one thing to the next. So, 3 intros. That's a main loop. Hold on. Let me try that again. Now, you are not guaranteed that intro 1 is going to play with main loop 1, or intro 3 is going to play with main loop 3. So the game randomly chooses one of these cues and plays it with another randomly chosen one, and you have to make sure that the end of one cue makes sense as it plays into the beginning of the next. thing with an ending. Oops. Oops, I doubled that up. Let me go back over here to my endings. Same thing with an ending. The ending is going to resolve or finish out the composition. Needs to bring the music to an ending. It needs to bring the music to a resolution, a finale. Typically, it resolves back to that tonic chord, ends on a solid tonic, and uses the drums and melody and harmony all to kind of move towards that finish and end. So, one thing to notice here that you do need to watch out for is that the endings actually get cut off, and you need to make sure any sort of cymbal decay or instrument decay or reverb tail has enough time to finish and fade all the way to the silence at the end. Here it just cut off. Same thing here. So while they're great musical endings, you just a little bit of production there just to make sure everything fades out all the way to silence. Let's try another one here. I guess they're all hidden. This one I think is a bit more synthy. Three main loops. Let's try this. So a melody, drums, progression, change here. Change. There should be changes to each cue should have slight changes to the melody, progression, the rhythm. Now I would agree that the feel of the first ones were a bit more lighthearted, more appropriate to the game. But yeah, this one does sound a little too synthy electronic, but just shows you different approaches here. Also gives me some things here that are not a good approach, something to point out. Here's three intros. Let's try that again. So they don't really have much of an intro or a build up into the main loops. This first intro here just sounds mostly like a 2-bar loop. Like it just kind of stays even all the way across instead of rising up and then falling back and rising back up. This one, third one, has more of a little snare roll. So that helps a bit, but you should have all of the instrumentation, drums, harmony, melody, all using and building, all being used to build up to that finale. Here's three endings. Those all work. They're solid endings. Good, strong musical resolutions, and they do fade out to silence. You have the 2 bars. Use the first bar to typically do a fill, kind of work the progression melody, kind of building up to that last chord or note, one solid kick and snare, and kind of ends everything out. Let's see. Remind myself which ones these are. Alright, that one works. Alright, and we'll just do one more example here. Gotta watch out if your waveforms are kind of real strong like this. It depends on the style of the music and how much compression or limiting you might have done. You just don't want to hit it too hard or clip or anything like that. Let's see what this one. I think this has a pretty strong melody. See each one of them loop, so they and they're structured on the 8 bars, so they make sense within the context of the game. So, strong lead, changes in the melody, harmony, and rhythm each time it goes from one cue to the next. 3 intros. So there's a bit of rise in there, but pretty much everything is full blast all the way through. So you want to definitely use both composition and mix to create those builds heading into the main loop cues. 3 endings. So then everything fades out and makes sure it reaches silence by the end of it. So hopefully that gives you a couple of different ideas, a couple of different approaches overall for the composition. Let me see here. There's a couple more things that I just want to point out here. Compose suggestions for composition. Compose interesting loops. Looping does not mean repetitive. This is definitely a big one. You have 8 bars. You want to use the entire 8 bars to develop the music. So you want to not repeat the same idea, especially the melodic idea, in the first half and second half of the cue. So sometimes I hear the same thing in the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars, or even worse, I hear the same thing 4 times. It's really a 2-bar loop playing 4 times in 8 bars. So definitely develop over the course of the entire 8 bars. Make sure the loops transition smoothly. You want to keep it in the same key, the same tempo, base it around a core progression that translates, and then you can then adjust and modify a little bit as you switch from one cue to the next. Develop the melody a bit more, move within the chord progression a bit, and change up the overall rhythm to provide the variation from one cue to the next. Keep the same tempo. I definitely already said that, where you don't want to jump around in tempo or else it'll cause kind of too sudden of a change. Continuous loops, avoid gaps, fades, pops, clicks, anything that's going to make it really obvious that the file just ended and started over again. You want to make sure that they are as seamless and invisible as possible. And the overall mix. Make sure that you have a constant mix for all of your cues. You want to make sure nothing's too loud, too overbearing, nothing's compressed too much, like completely squashed and limited. But also on the other end, you don't want it to be so small. Sometimes I get waveforms that are really, really tiny. You have it cranked up in your studio and then you bounce everything in. And it's really, really tiny waveforms and it can't be heard against the sound effects. You want to play the game. You want to put your music into the game and listen to your music against the sound effects to check the mix and see how everything works and to see how loud it is. We'll talk about putting your music in the game because you are going to create a video capture of how your music is working in the game. So that will lead us into another assignment here. Oh, where did this go? Not that. This. Right here. Your next assignment for the month, or sorry, for the week, is game capture. You will do a video so you can display it, you can show it off. You can, well, as you turn it in, can reference how your music is actually working in the game. You're going to do a video capture of how your music works. So once you complete the assignment, you can put your music actually into the game and test it out. So let's see here. This is the game. It's a Mac application, and if you right click on it, you can do show package contents, and it will give you a folder appropriately named contents, and inside of contents you can go to data and streaming assets. And there you will have two folders, very familiar, one called music and one called sound effects. Your sound effects folder should be filled with all of the original sound effects from the game, but your music folder should be empty. So you are going to put your music files, right? Here's all the music files that you will end up creating. 9 total files. Once they're bounced and formatted and looping properly and named, you put them into this folder. And the next time you run the game, your music will work. And if it does not work correctly, then it's an issue with your formatting of your files. Double check, re-import them back into Logic, check them, bounce them, see how they all work, and test it out again. So you will have the opportunity to place your music in the game and then test it out to see how it actually works. Your game capture assignment has a PDF that describes the process. Oh no, that's the wrong one. How about I get the right one? How about this one? Game capture. Once you put you create all the music, you bounce out the files, you put them in the game, you test them out, see how they work, make any changes that are needed. Then you are going to capture a video, and this is a pretty easy process overall. You take some software, download it, installed to get it all working, and there's some technical hurdles. But once it's all, the process is all set up, then you can use it over the course of the month to do video captures with the submissions for your game projects. So you're going to use QuickTime and Soundflower to capture the audio and video. I'm pretty sure you have used QuickTime in previous classes for other assignments to do video captures. Give me another heads up in the chat that says that you've used QuickTime for some assignment previous at some point in the degree program. Hopefully you have. I always want to check that to make sure they're still doing those assignments so that, okay, I'm getting a yes in the chat. Excellent. So you can do the video and it'll capture anything on your desktop, and you're pretty familiar with that process. But the problem is capturing the audio. And so there's a separate application called Soundflower that will allow you to capture all of the audio from your game. We'll talk about how those work. You don't actually have to be good at playing the game. That's certainly fine. But what you are trying to do is demonstrate your music. So have a few intros, make sure all the main loops play, lose life a couple of times and die and fall off the edge and play the endings, just so that we can get it only needs to be about 60 seconds long, about a minute, just to show off all of the parts of your music in your game. You can clean off your desktop of any extraneous items. But want to make this as professional as possible. You want to make sure, if you can, only capture the game window, and we'll talk about how that works. What else? You are encouraged to eventually capture footage from all 3 of your games over the course of the month. So this is the process of setting up how this works, and then we'll be doing this for all of your games throughout the month. And once you have the process under control, then it's really just playing the game. So you'll use an application called Soundflower. It's a very useful application to pass audio around inside of your computer. It allows you to connect the output of one application into the input of another application. So you'll install Soundflower, and you'll set up Soundflower basically adds another audio output in your computer, and so you can set the output of your computer to go through Soundflower, and it's like a audio cable, just in the same way that you plug a microphone into a preamp, and you have a cable that connects those. This Soundflower cable is going to connect the output of your game into the input of QuickTime. So you'll open up QuickTime, and this is all about doing the screen recordings, which you're familiar with. So you'll click and create a new screen recording, and you want to check your options and make sure the input is going to be set to Soundflower so that you can record the game and the sound from the game. That's probably the most difficult process of getting Soundflower to record properly in QuickTime. And if you run into any issues, please get in contact with me to make sure it all works. So you should at this point see audio bouncing up and down. Let me show you here. So Soundflower is the same thing that I use to pass audio around inside of my computer to get Logic to go and go out to GoToTraining. You can see my mic bouncing up and down here as it takes the input from Soundflower to be able to record everything. So I could hit record here and then start recording part of my screen and capturing my microphone input also, or capturing Soundflower, really. So then you can do a windowed version. You can do a full screen game. You can click and drag and capture only what you need to for the video. And then it's really just about playing the game. There's a separate application called Soundflower Bed that allows you to monitor everything that's going on so you can actually hear what you're doing. Up until this point, you probably wouldn't be able to hear anything. It would just be passed around internally inside of your computer. But Soundflower Bed will allow you to set the output back to whatever your default output is, whether it's headphones or your speakers or whatever. Then you record it. There's a couple of different ways. You can either do a full screen game or you can do a windowed game. And then just try it a couple of times and demonstrate the game as best as to really demonstrate your music. You're not really playing the game to show off the game. You're showing off your music. So trigger as much music as you can. Play for about 60 seconds to just show off what you can. I'm certainly not grading you on your quality of gameplay. It's more important about the process, because you're going to be using this throughout the month, the process of capturing the audio and video and making sure your music is actually working in the game. And then I'll be referencing these videos as I'm grading to see how it all works and plays back together, because it's one thing just to hear the WAV files, but how it all works in the game with the sound effects will give you a separate approach, a separate idea about it. So video capture should really be no longer than 60 seconds. That should give you enough time to show off and demonstrate everything. And then you exit out and you stop the screen recording and you name it. Name it and zip it up and send it off to me. Please watch the video. If people have an issue with this assignment, is because they probably didn't actually watch the video. Or else they would hear that there's no audio, or it's the incorrect audio, or it's all static and crackling, or whatever problem it could be. So please double check everything. Make sure the video is recording. Again, this is something that you should download and start trying right away just to make sure it all works for you. And then once the process of recording is good, then it's just playing the video game. And you can do this process throughout the rest of the month and have it set up and working for you. Clear off your desktop. Again, these are for the purposes of the class, but eventually they would be used for portfolios and demo materials. So you want to make them as professional looking as possible. Clear off your desktop. Notice like my desktop here, however buried it is. It's just a blue background. I have all sorts of crazy desktops on my other screen, but those don't need to be in the broadcast. Same thing with your video recording. Just do a basic desktop. You can hide the dock, get the icons out of the way, just so that they would focus on your actual game and your music instead of your messy desktop. You can change this game resolution. If the game is the video is stuttering or jumps around a bit, then you can change the resolution of the video capture. You can change the resolution of your screen, the resolution of the game, and all of those, the lower you go, you can do a lower screen resolution and get a better video capture. So if things aren't working for you, if you're having issues with the video capture, please contact me for both the audio and video, and we can get this process set up correctly. You name it, you zip it up, and you submit it to FSO. And again, there is a peer review section. So you just take your video and you can post it up on FSO. You can host it on YouTube. You can send me a Dropbox link, just something to say, hey, I'm going to check out your doing peer review. Check out my video, and we'll broadcast it and take a listen to it. So it's a great opportunity for everybody to check out everybody else's work. All right, let's just kind of finish this out now. So your other game, so past 2D platformer. Next week, your next game is called Angry Bots, futuristic third-person shooter. It is meant to mimic a lot of kind of the shooter variety of games. A lot of games are out there kind of built around the idea of battle and exploration. In a lot of games, there's a period of time where you're just wandering around aimlessly, kind of lost, trying to figure out where the next place to go is, and then you go around a corner and there's an enemy or a group of enemies, and you battle for a little while, and you have to defeat the enemy, and then you move on to the next part of the game and just kind of continue progressing forward. So we're going to explore this sort of approach. We're going to talk about how do we move between really strikingly different pieces of music like that could be set up for ambient and action, where we go from a lower intensity, lower pace ambient cue, which is sometimes known as exploration cue, where you're just kind of wandering around the game level, and then you go to the battle or the action music. There are different robots in this game. There are angry robots. You are a mercenary trying to infiltrate the robot laboratory, and the robots are there to stop you. So you engage in different, or you meet different types of robots, and each one of them has their own unique musical theme. Then week 3, your game is called Palace of Orinthalion. This game is modeled off an open world fantasy game. So your music is going to be able to be played and switch and change with different actions from the player. In an open world fantasy game, the player has the opportunity of going off in any sort of direction and engaging in the story in what feels like almost any sort of order. Certain games like puzzle games and even like casual games, even shooter games like that, a lot of games are based off of levels or a very direct path. They're like linear gameplay. Especially if you're playing through a story, you often have to go from point A to point B to point C. But in a lot of more modern, sometimes they're fantasy world games where You're kind of the main character in this big, large story. Well, you don't have to go in the one linear order. You can go start at point D and go to point X and go to point Q and then over to M and then go in any sort of order. So, which makes it much more difficult approach for a composer, where if you don't know exactly what sort of order that they're going to encounter your music, how do you build a soundtrack that can switch and change in any sort of way? So each game has a different musical approach through the different weeks. Your other assignment for this week is looping techniques. The assignment details different approaches to creating musical loops that are very, very necessary for all of our game projects, because a lot of our music revolves around using musical loops so that the music can stay in one place and then transition into the next piece of music as it moves along. So that hopefully will give you an overview of our first week, the assignments that we have, the kind of flow of all of the material for the month, talking about our games, talking about our how to be successful in the class and how to approach the assignments. If you have any questions, I'll go ahead and stick around for a while. Can answer any questions if you have them. You can post them up in the chat. But other than that, please go ahead and download the assignments and get started on them. Come on our Thursday night class armed with questions. We can discuss any approaches that are needed. And let's go ahead and wrap it up there. All right. Thank you very much for hanging out on our first session, and I will see you again on Thursday. All right. Have a good evening.